Gentlemen, I have returned once again. Today, I want to talk about Magnus the Red, the Crimson King, Primarch of the Thousand Suns. Now, if you've seen my other videos on Primarchs, you may be wondering, is Magnus also one of my favorite Primarchs? No, because he's a traitor. But I do find him to be one of the more interesting traitors, because if events had played out slightly differently, the Horus Heresy likely could have been contained, and Big E wouldn't be glued to the throne. In which case, we wouldn't really have a franchise, so if anything, we should probably be thanking him. Anyways, same old story, Magnus was created on Terra by the Emperor, except Magnus is unique in that from his first moment, he was fully sentient and he remembers his own creation, which kinda seems like it'd be terrifying. But setting aside the idea of mind-body dualism, the Chaos Gods would fling him into the warp, and then Magnus would fling himself to Prospero. Now, Prospero as a whole was a shithole, but somehow Magnus managed to crash land himself on the one good city on the entire planet. And this was one of the few planets during the Age of Strife that was tolerant of Psykers. Little backstory here. During the Age of Strife, Psykers were typically a big no-no. Human Psykers started to first appear around the same time the Age of Strife happened. This is not a coincidence, as this is one of the main things that caused the Age of Strife to happen. Humanity at this point in history was very ignorant about Psykers, and the warp was starting to become more turbulent as the Eldar Empire slowly declined. Just give you a quick little rundown on the math here. When you have untrained, ignorant Psykers and a freshly turbulent warp, you're going to get horrible mutations, a few demonic possessions, and the occasional invasion. That is, if your planet has a relatively small and stable population. If you're on a hive world with 3 trillion people, it goes from occasional to constant. After this happens a couple of times, eventually the Men of Iron, and later just other humans, would hunt down Psykers with extreme prejudice. Prospero was not one of those worlds, which was fortunate for Magnus as he definitely was a Psyker. All Primarchs have a strong fundamental connection to the warp as they're partially made from the warp. Korax mentions this right before he beats the Lorgar's ass, and Gilliman notes that every time he travels through the warp, for the duration of the travel, he knows its true nature and that he is of the warp. All Primarchs also inherit a trait from the Emperor. Magnus's trait was that he inherited the Emperor's psychic connection to the warp. So you combine that wombo combo and you get a super Psyker who is second only to the Emperor. And since he grew up on Prospero, he was able to study the warp and his Psyker powers as he grew up. And one of the benefits of being a top tier Psyker and remembering how he was made is he was able to talk to the Emperor using telepathy before the Emperor even reached Prospero. Eventually the Emperor does reach Prospero, at which point Magnus joins him. Magnus would study the warp with the Emperor, and one thing the Emperor tried to explain to Magnus that Magnus's big red head couldn't grasp is that while the Imperium is a near-endless source of knowledge and power, there is also darkness in the warp, entities and forces that have been around since the dawn of creation, beings whose malevolence is matched only by their cunning. Magnus did not take this warning to heart, because Magnus is a moron. Throughout his entire life, he wasn't just a prodigy, he was effortlessly able to control the warp without any real effort or consequences. And the only time he met someone that was more powerful than him, it was his father. So, needless to say, Magnus had an ego, which is fair to an extent, I mean it's understandable. What is not understandable is him believing that the Emperor's specific warning directed at him was meant for regular mortal human Psykers and did not apply to him. Hence why Magnus is a moron. After that little pep talk, Magnus joins the 15th Legion, the Thousand Suns. Given that its Legion got the gene seed of Magnus, it shouldn't be a huge surprise that a lot of the Space Marines of the 15th Legion would become Psykers of their own. And this was honestly terrific, for about 5 minutes. As mentioned before, Psykers weren't exactly a perfect science, nor very popular at this point. Or at any point, really. So, some of the Psyker Marines would begin to get horrible mutations and eventually become Chaos Spawn. This process, which they called the Flesh Change, further made the Thousand Suns less popular in the Imperium, so Magnus would set out to solve this problem. The brilliant solution his Primarch brain cooked up was to go talk to some of the entities the Emperor specifically warned him about earlier. Turns out the Emperor's warnings were well-founded, because Magnus would run into Tzeentch, though he did not know it was Tzeentch at the time. Tzeentch would give Magnus what he wanted, but he made it look as though Magnus had outsmarted him. It did cost him his eye, hence why it's called the Red Cyclops, but the mutations of the Legion would come under control and stabilize. Even though he was now half blind, I think that's how that works, it inflated his ego more that he outplayed these warp entities that the Emperor swore were dangerous. But for the time, the gene seed stabilized. So they would set out on the Great Crusade, and oh boy, Magnus had a lot of fun. Because again, the Emperor gave Magnus some advice he would ignore. The Emperor basically told Magnus that while he was out there, there's a chance he would see, find, and or learn about some weird shit. The Emperor then told Magnus to do us all a favor, and when he finds that weird shit, to pretend he didn't find it. And that for now, some questions were best left unanswered. But as fate would have it, Magnus's greatest enemy was his inability to rein in his own ego-fueled curiosity. Because Magnus did find a lot of weird shit out there, and instead of ignoring it, he cataloged it and wrote it into a book called the Book of Magnus. Listen, Pops, I know you told me to destroy everything, and I promise you I did. I read it, I made a copy, and then destroyed it. I don't know why you're so mad. I did literally nothing wrong. Anyways, at some point during the Great Crusade, some of the other legions began to really take issue with the Thousand Sons and their psychic powers. The Emperor really wasn't too big on the idea of a Psyker Legion to begin with, so when the other Primarchs also started complaining, he finally decided to just can the program and to basically ban the use of all psychic powers. The only exceptions were for astropaths, navigators, and the few psychers who were specifically sanctioned. A bit later, the Emperor hands the Great Crusade off to Horus and returns to Terra to work on the webway project for humanity. The webway is another form of warp travel, sort of. Think of the standard warp travel like sailing across the ocean in a sailboat. Say you want to get from America to Britain. The conditions can vary a lot. If the waters are calm, the wind is favorable, the night sky is clear so you can see the stars and tell where you're going, and you stay away from known danger spots, you can usually get to where you're going without too many issues and have a rough idea of when and where you will arrive. On the contrary, if you're sailing through a Category 5 hurricane with the whole of the ship starting to buckle, you can't see any stars or get any sense of direction, coral reefs are everywhere, and ravenous sharks are constantly trying to leap onto the deck, then crossing the pond becomes a little tricky, inconsistent, some might even say dangerous. For the webway, imagine that instead of sailing across the ocean, you had a fully enclosed, large, heavily reinforced bridge running from America to Britain. Now travel becomes much more consistent and is not influenced by external factors such as storms, navigation issues, mean fish, what have you. The Emperor decided that establishing this form of travel for humanity would be a good investment and use of his time. Now the caveat to the webway is it is essentially a fixed open gate into the warp. And until it is fully built, enclosed, and sealed, it is a two-way gate that the warp can use to enter the Imperium as well. So the Emperor put a psychic barrier around the tunnel and the Imperial Palace to keep the warp out while the tunnel is being worked on. In the meantime, Magnus is on Prospero, and he saw a vision of Horus's betrayal. So he decided to warn the Emperor by once again doing what the Emperor specifically told him not to do. Instead of using astro-telepathy, which is safer but slower, he used astral projection and projected himself into the warp and traveled towards Terra himself. He ran into a slight problem though when he bounced off a strange barrier and a webway tunnel that he had never seen before. The Emperor kept this project secret, but Magnus had learned a small bit about the webway during his travels in the Great Crusade. Now, instead of asking himself, who put this barrier here? Perhaps more importantly, why did they put this barrier here? He immediately wondered how he could punch through this barrier and get to Terra in record time, so he gave it a whirl, and he found that the barrier was too powerful. And instead of thinking, wow, whoever put this barrier here sure put a lot of effort into it and really didn't want anyone getting through, he wondered again how he could get through. Like, this is so fucking dumb. And wouldn't you know it, then a mysterious warp entity named not Tzeentch showed up out of nowhere and offered Magnus more power so he could get through the barrier. What a coinkydink. What a fortunate turn of events. Magnus's Primarch brain thinks it through and realizes that this is the best idea he has heard this entire crusade. So without hesitation he says yes, he breaks through the barrier and the webway, and he arrives in Terra at record time, so mission accomplished. Except now, the warp has a permanently open gate directly into the heart of the Imperial Palace. But you know, exit strategy, we'll worry about that one later. The Emperor did not share this sentiment, because the Emperor was pissed. but he couldn't really do anything about it personally because now he has to sit on the Golden Throne and focus all of his psychic might on powering the Astronomicon and holding the breach in the webway shut to stop more demons from flooding in while the Custodies go in there and try to kill all the ones who have already entered. So he sends Lehman to go get Magnus. On his way there, the War Master Horus, who people don't know is a traitor at this point, gave clarification on the Emperor's orders that he is supposed to get Magnus as in execute his ass as well as his legion. So, Lehman, being the Emperor's executioner, sets out to do exactly that. And Prospero did not fare well during this sibling quarrel. Magnus had realized at this point that he had been played a fool by Tzeentch, and he was feeling depressed and remorseful, but after Lehman leveled half the planet and hit Magnus with a backbreaker, Magnus started to think this might be a bit much, a bit of an overreaction, and in that moment he gave himself over to Tzeentch and became a demon Primarch. Which in my opinion is actually one of the most important moments of the heresy, as it sealed the Imperium's fate. Up to that point, the situation was actually salvageable. When Magnus broke the barrier and the webway, the Emperor was forced onto the Golden Throne to hold it shut, and no normal psyker can do it. You literally have to hold back the entirety of the warp. So the only other person who was sat on the throne was Malcador, who was the strongest regular human psyker, and even he was only able to sit on the throne for a short time. Fortunately, Malcador mentions that the Emperor had a contingency in place exactly for this situation. Unfortunately, that contingency's name was Magnus. Magnus, having psychic abilities second only to the Emperor and the physical durability of a Primarch, would be able to sit on the throne for an extended period of time, at least longer than Malcador could, which would free up the Emperor, allowing him to go into the webway, kill all the demons, and patch the hole Magnus made, restore the barrier, and we're back in business. But all that went straight down the toilet the second Magnus became a demon. Which is why his story is interesting to me. Magnus messed up at every turn, he never listened, and his own arrogance led him to believe that he understood the warp and its secrets even better than the Emperor. Yet after all that, after learning the hard way that the primordial forces of nature are not to be trifled with, there actually was a final chance for redemption, but it was taken away from him by Horus at the last moment, and now he is eternally damned as a slave to the Changer of Ways, and if that is not grimdark, I don't know what is. What I do know is that this video is a wrap for me. Like always, this was a lot of fun. I'm not gonna lie, I get a little heated when talking about Magnus. If you fellas also got comments on Magnus, and if he did or did not do anything wrong, let me hear it. If there's anything you want me to talk about, let me hear that too. If you liked this video, you know what to do. If you didn't like it, you also know what to do, and probably have already done it, let's be honest here. If you want to hear more from me in the future, consider subscribing so I can get a short-term dopamine hit. Until next time though, fellas, I will see you later.